Good evening. Hello and welcome to Wake Forest. I am Ann Phelps, the Director of Programming and Leadership and Character here at Wake Forest. Thank y'all so much for coming out to this wonderful event with our distinguished guest, Dr. Cornel West. First of all, I want to thank our many co-sponsors from across the university for this event, 28 in all, which is to say, too many to make you listen to by name. But please know that we are so grateful for your partnership and support, without which we absolutely could not do any of this week's events. This conversation actually kicks off our Educating Character Across the University Conference, which is being presented by the Program for Leadership and Character here at Wake Forest, as well as the Oxford Character Project at Oxford University. If you have registered for the conference, you should have received an email from us detailing where to go tonight, tomorrow, and Saturday based on the sessions for which you have registered. If you did not register for a conference, don't worry, you're still in the right place. This program is excited and proud to bring you this and other events to campus and beyond in our mission to not only provide innovative teaching, creative programming, and cutting-edge research here at Wake Forest, but also to catalyze a broader public conversation that places character at the center of leadership. If this phrase sounds familiar, particularly for some of the students that I make recite it at the beginning of every semester, it's possible that you have heard it in our mission statement. And speaking of students, if you are a student and you are here, please raise your hand. Wow, awesome. I especially want to thank you on the brink of finals for coming out tonight, which is just a testament to how wonderful it is to have Cornel West here. You can read more of this mission statement and learn more about what we do in the program and who we are by heading over to leadershipandcharacter.wfu.edu. And now to introduce tonight's speakers, I want to turn it over to our Dean of the School of Divinity here at Wake Forest, the Presidential Chair in Religion and Society, and the Dean of Waite Chapel, Dr. Jonathan Walton.
Good evening. So I've been asked to introduce tonight's speaker. Okay. It's kind of hard to introduce somebody whom you already know. You know him. Many of you had the pleasure last year when he graced this lectern. Yet, as is true of grand intellects and extraordinary artists, this gospel blues philosopher and jazz man in the life of the mind always leaves us wanting more. So when considering the ideal educator, the ideal scholar to kick off this Educating Character Across the University Conference, Leadership and Character understood that few others that would be as engaging and as appropriate as this evening's guest, Dr. Cornel West. When it comes to the scholarly enterprise, there are few grand intellectuals whose work shapes several fields across multiple generations. One might think of W.E.B. Du Bois, Flannery O'Connor, Reinhold Niebuhr, or Toni Morrison. Well, over the past 4 decades, the corpus of Cornel West clears this incredibly high bar. A capacious thinker, a prolific author, he has penned 22 books and has infused the culture with a clear and consistent message, best summed up in the powerful parable of Jesus in Matthew 25. We will ultimately be judged by how we treat the most vulnerable, the violated, and the victimized among us. So it is this, his philosophical approach and his moral character, it's certainly informed by the progressive strand of Afro-Protestant Christianity, but it's not exclusive to a particular faith. His work bears witness and challenges those of us who might otherwise be blinded even by Protestant privilege. For his version of progressive and prophetic Christian witness must be willing to reach across socially and intellectually constructed barriers, tribes, ideologies, and uncritical commitment to any doctrine or dogma amount to crass idolatry, particularly when it blinds us to human suffering. Racial, religious, or national identity cannot trump moral affinity for Professor West, nor ought class, gender expression, sexuality, and any other social construct delimit or overdetermine human personality. This is who he is. Each of us, he encourages us consistently, has a moral responsibility to see and affirm the divine in each other, namely those that our cultural patterns and social structures have rendered invisible. You know him. His genius is undeniable. His influence is unmistakable. His grace and gravitas are infectious, and his moral commitments are incontestable. They are as consistent as his black three-piece suit and his Afro pick. You know him. And because you know him, I don't need to introduce him. I can just present him. Dr. Cornel West.
Well, thank you, Dean Walton, for that prophetic introduction. And thank you all for being here to this wonderful night to see the one and only Dr. Cornel West. I'm Michael Lamb. I direct the program for leadership and character here at Wake Forest. And Dr. West was one of my teachers in graduate school. And he inspired me then as he does now with his expansive intellect, his tenacious passion for justice, and his deep commitment to living an ethical life. So Cornel, welcome back to Wake Forest.
Dear brother, it is my blessing and honor to be a part of your program, your conference. And first, this introduction by this president now of Princeton Theological Seminary. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. No, indeed. Those words mean much, but to be in conversation with you, my dear brothers, is a blessing. We have some precious memories there in Princeton with Jeff Stout and the others. And this brother has just written the magisterial text called A Commonwealth of Hope by the great African father, St. Augustine, wrestling with how you get beyond presumption and despair and provide some zone of mature hope grounded in piety and humility. This is a timely text, not an advertisement, but a truth-telling connected to how you wrestle with leadership and character. So let's salute our dear brother here.
Thank you, Cornel.
No, it's true though, brother.
Thank you.
It's a magisterial text.
Well, thank you. Well,
puts a smile on Peter Brown's face, and he's our dear brother. I correspond.
Well, tonight is a night to talk about hope and character and many other topics. And it is a night to talk about kind of how our characters are formed. And so, Cornel, maybe to get this started, can you share more about your own formation of character? Were there influences in your own life growing up, or maybe ways in which as a student or professor you were shaped in the university to be a person of character?
Well, I appreciate the question. I mean, one is that we all are unique and singular. And so we all have our own distinctive pilgrimages and journeys. And mine is one beyond blessedness, because if anybody has ever had the chance to meet my mother, Irene B. West, or Clifton West, you would see that I am a thoroughgoing failure in terms of the moral and spiritual standards of excellence, of what the Greeks would call arete, at the highest level. And I'm not saying they're pure and pristine, but they had levels of integrity and honesty and decency that I don't come close to. And I didn't ask for that. That's grace. I just showed up. I was conceived in Texas and born in Oklahoma, but we won't go into the process. I was just born right there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the same hospital as Gap Band. And the Wilson brothers, Uncle Charlie and company. And for me then to think, well, how can I build on that rich tradition, because I'm just a moment in that tradition. You could say the same thing about Ken and Angela Lamb, right. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Right there from what, Tennessee?
Mm-hmm. Right in the middle of it.
Integrity, honesty, and how does a vanilla brother from Tennessee go to Rhodes College, then Rhodes Scholar, then PhD, Princeton, and now at Wake Forest? You know somebody was praying for him. Somebody been praying for me too. And most importantly, it means then that whatever our stories are, I would hope that given all of the overwhelming pessimism and cynicism and nihilism and despair and despondency that we all understandably and unflinchingly have to wrestle with, we ought to begin with a note of revolutionary piety. And by piety, I mean what Jeff Stout, George Santayana, and others, acknowledging virtuously the sources of good in our own pilgrimage from our mama's womb to tomb. What are the things that have helped us sustain, persist, and persevere? Or as Clara Ward put it in 1951, my soul looks back and wonders how I got over. What has gone into the shaping and molding of who we are? Each and every one of us, we are who we are because somebody loved us. Somebody cared for us, somebody shaped us and molded us. And that cuts across a variety of different lines, you see. Richard Rorty means much to me. Vanilla brother. John Coltrane, I take a bullet for. Born right down the street, never met him, but he's my soulmate. He's chocolate, yes, but I don't love him because he's chocolate. I love him because he's a chocolate-loving artist who gave of himself, and therefore he constitutes part of the wind at my back. That's revolutionary piety. Being in contact with the things that are sources of good for you, that lead you to be in the world but not of that world. Or at least try to be connected to the best of the world. The integrity, honesty, decency, vision, courage, justice, as opposed to what Howard Thurman, the great towering figure who taught Brother Martin King. The hounds of hell, which are hatred and greed and cowardliness and hypocrisy and envy and resentment, and they reside in each and every one of us. And it's part of the battlefield of our own souls where we engage in that contestation and struggle to see what kind of character we would have. So then maybe then we can become lovers of truth and goodness and beauty, and a Christian like myself love the holy of God. And therefore even talk about leadership, because as you know, I'm very suspicious of that very category of leadership. Has been so bastardized in the last 50 years or so by the market and by spectacle and by power, and talk solely about interest, not enough talk about what it means to be a statesperson, a statesman, a stateswoman who's committed to not just public good and public life, but believes in personal integrity as opposed to just cheap, superficial popularity. Cut against that grain. And of course it means then, and this is what I learned most from not just mom and dad, but Willie P. Cook, my pastor at Shiloh Baptist Church. He was a great man. I'll never be as great as he was. Courage. That's the enabling virtue of all the other virtues. All the other virtues are empty and vacuous if you don't have courage. And Plato's right in the Laches. Courage is a species of wisdom. It's not rashness. It's not recklessness. It's not just superficial fearlessness. Save that for Hollywood. Courage is a form of wisdom that allows you to see things more clearly and feel more deeply and hear more closely so that you can act more courageously. They all go together, those unity of the virtues that constitute a certain kind of high character, so that when it's time to lead, the real content of that leadership is the love, the courage, the vision, the prudence, the practical wisdom, the prudentia, as the Latins used to call it, you see. Today is just too often opportunism, next election, interest group politics, manipulation, obsessed with the press, polarization, and of course it results in what we have today, which is gangsterization with escalating neo-fascisms here and around the world. And what do we pass on to the younger generation then, in terms of the great examples of character, so that they can actually believe that great characters are not isolated icons in a museum that they could go to during some field trip in high school and say, no, when I see Malcolm X, when I see Rabbi Heschel, when I see Edward Said, when I see Miles Horton, they're vital persons in a vibrant tradition that I am a part of. That's very different. I saw Christian McBride last night at the Village Vanguard, up there looking like Charles Mingus on his double bass. And he does what? He knows that the jazz figures that he invokes are not isolated individuals detached from him. They're part of the same flow, the same tradition, the same heritage, the same legacy, but he's got to be an innovator and a caretaker of it. And the same would be true for Jasiri X when he hears Tupac. Don't imitate Tupac. He's a giant in the tradition. You build on him and find your voice. You come from a black people whose very anthem is lift every voice, not lift every echo. You don't want to be an echo. Who wants to be an extension of an echo chamber, an echo of another silo, an echo of another interest group, an echo of another narrowly defined slice? No, find your voice the way Aretha did and the way Billie Holiday did, the way Billy Eckstein, and we ain't got to Luther Vandross yet. Finding their voices. And the only way you find your voice is to wrestle with the night side in your own soul. It's the only way you do it. William Butler Yeats is right when he says it takes more courage to dig deep into the dark corners of your own soul and wrestle with who you are than it does for a soldier to fight on the battlefield. That's our Irish blues brother, William Butler. Yes, he's right. And then the question becomes, what are the conditions under which we can facilitate the courage, the integrity, the honesty, the decency? Where will young people find it? They come to the university. Is it too corporatized? Is it too market-driven? Is it too polarized? Where are they going to find the exemplars? Kant says examples are the go-kart of judgment in the Critique of Pure Reason. He's right. He's not always right. He's right in that sentence. Examples are the go-kart of judgment. Where do you find the exemplars? Do they find it in the music? Do they find it in sports? Will they find it in the churches? Thank God for William Barber. I know I'm in North Carolina. Both father and son. Father and son. Towering figures, grand examples. And they're not the only ones. There's others as well. There's Brother Johnson in Greensboro. And who took Johnson's church over? He's a young brother. Brother Wesley, he's my student. Oh, I love that brother so much. Yes, yes, yes. Tell him I said hello. He's another great example. Younger generation. But he had to spend time around other people who were trying to cultivate character in order to do it. He had to have concrete examples. I can't stand this talk these days about abstract role models. Who's your role model? Who's your role model? Oprah's my role model. She's not your role model. You don't know her. She don't know you. She can be a source of inspiration with her entrepreneurial genius. She's not an example of political courage, but that's another lecture. I love my sister. I'm going to tell the truth about her. But an example of somebody you're connected with. You relate.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, and research now suggests that's true, actually, that we can see that it's concrete examples that make the most sort of impact on us.
So you got empirical data on what I'm saying?
They're empirical data. See, look at there.
Hey, Lord, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice?
Well, Cornel, you mentioned Reverend Barber and your own sort of way you think about courage and integrity in public life. And you're one of the most influential activists and scholars of issues related to racial justice. How can a critically informed account of character, of courage, of integrity inform our efforts to promote and secure racial justice and equality? And are there certain virtues you would recommend as being essential to that struggle?
Well, I mean, one is just trying to be more like Fannie Lou Hamer. Trying to be more like Ella Baker. Trying to be more like Martin. And that goes far beyond, any talk about race or skin pigmentation and so forth. See, we're at a point now in the culture where we're so polarized that people think about whiteness and they think of people are stuck in whiteness. So you can't account for Miles Horton, you can't account for Ann Braden, you can't account for John Brown, you can't account for Rabbi Heschel, you can't account for all of those white brothers and sisters that went against white supremacy. And there's a tradition of it. It's not a mass movement, but it's a very important tradition, you see. But the same is true with black, you see. You can get locked into blackness. So you end up rightly talking about how beautiful Clarence Thomas is. He is beautiful aesthetically, ideologically, spiritually, morally. ... You see. So blackness is not going to take you too far. You got black magnificent brothers and sisters. You got black gangsters and thugs. And every magnificent black person has a thug in him. Tupac is right. You got a gangster element in him. Augustine is right.
He's right.
Same is true with yellow. These categories are so abstract, and these labels, they float all around in such a way they create various prisons in which actual human beings get locked in that doesn't allow them to unleash their potential for good. And so with Martin, one of the best examples of this is Brother Jonathan's book, Lens of Love. He's not just a president, he's a major scholar on this. Lens of Love. If you're a serious love warrior and freedom fighter and joy spreader and wounded healer, then you're going far beyond gender, class, nation, skin pigmentation. It's about spiritual formation, moral cultivation, and moral action. That is the litmus test. By your fruits you shall know them, somewhere I read. It doesn't say by your foliage. We got a whole culture obsessed with foliage. By your spectacle, by your posing, by your posturing, by your move, by your career, by your position, by your, hey, that's exactly what spiritual decay is. Trying to allow the semblances and resemblances to somehow displace what Ashford and Simpson would call the real thing. And the real thing is always messy, funky, mixed, complex, and complicated because it's human. I love the motto for this institution. Right?
Absolutely.
For humanity.
That's right.
Did they really know what they meant when they said for? Because if you're for humanity, you're for the deep, deep funk and deep, deep love. Because that's where you find the love, in the funk. You never find love in a deodorized space. You don't. The word made flesh. It's not just biblical. It's a psychic truth. Human. It's Dante. Earthy, grotesque, visionary, ugly. Star. Each text ends on the star. In the gutter, looking at the star. Yes, that's the human, for human. Most of us are fearful of wrestling with our humanity. And we rather escape in the narrow labels and categories and the Manichaean views of, I got all the good, they've got all the bad, I've got all the positive, they got all the negative. And it is a human thing, it's inside all of us. And that's why not just education, but spiritual formation, because so much of education can be miseducation and just reinforce forms of learned ignorance and learned bigotry. And so in that sense, we need each other's voices, and that's exactly what you all do. Yeah. How old is your program now, my brother?
We're here 6 years.
It's been 6 years?
6 years at Wake Forest, yeah. And it's been really great to have so many people engaged in this program from around the university and now from around the country.
And now the world, too.
Well, we have great partners around the world. And what we've been thinking about a lot is how do you actually engage these questions of difference? And you mentioned polarization now. You've been doing a lot of work the last few years with your friend, Robbie George, colleague from Princeton.
Yeah, brother Robbie. He's been sick, though. We got prayed.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he's bouncing back, though.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I just talked to him just yesterday. He's in the hospital. But we had prayer. He's holding on. He's holding on.
Good. Well, you have a deep friendship with Professor George.
Well, not a friendship, it's a brotherhood.
Brotherhood, yeah. Brotherhood.
Friendship doesn't cut deep enough, yeah.
Yeah. And so what role does brotherhood play in helping us navigate friendship, brotherhood, sisterhood, navigating these differences and living out the kind of love you describe? How do you think about the role of friendship, and especially friendship with those who are very different from us? Yeah. And are there any limits on who we can be friends with?
Well, you can only get in so many at a time. In one lifetime, you know what I mean? Very, very much so. But it's hard to say, friendships and brotherhoods and things. I mean, the kind of thing me and Jonathan had, we don't have no language for it, do we? We don't have a language for it. We sing a song, it breaks the back of words. You know what I mean? We break bread at his place later on tonight and start singing and things. That we're in a zone that is majestic and sublime, even as it remains funky and on the earth. And so I don't think there's a formula or an algorithm or a general theory here. It's just a way of learning how to open yourself, be vulnerable, to pour yourself into others and allow yourself for them to pour into you, revel in their humanity. So you have to find certain things that are similar. I mean, Brother Robbie and I, we teach together, we read. He's very much a Thomas Catholic. I'm a Kierkegaardian, hang loose, left wing, cognac drinking Baptist. I mean, so we got a lot of differences that we have, but we love the quest for truth. We love argument. We love conversation, and we fight like cats and dogs over certain political issues because we have very deep disagreements about some of these things. It's just that the love is deeper than the disagreement, and that's ought to be true. I think of any deep brotherhood or friendship. I've got a lot of friends, like some of my black folk. I got black nationalist brothers and sisters who people would think, well, why you spend time with black nationalists? Don't you think nationalism is too often an idolatry that gets in the way of keeping track of the humanity of people outside national boundaries? Yes, I do. I believe that every flag is under the cross. Every flag is under unarmed truth and unconditional love. And nationalism is very dangerous. And these days monopolized in very ugly ways by right wings and neo-fascists. But at the same time, there's aspects and elements of people's humanity that you still revel in, even when you disagree with them. They could be black, they could be brown, they could be white, Jewish, Arab, Muslim, or what have you see. But each one of us, again, have our own journeys, and so our testimonies are going to be very, very different. I don't think there's a kind of general theory. The important thing, again, is example, though. You see, it's example. De Tocqueville was right when he said that one of the dangers of American democracy is given all of his talk about individualism It's addicted to conformity. And it's grounded in a deep loneliness, a sense of isolation and alienation. Remember the chapter, Why Americans Are So Restless in the Midst of Prosperity. Now, this is the French aristocratic brother in the 1830s. And he comes to America and he sees these people, they're full of so much energy and vitality and unbelievable vibrancy with these civic associations and these voluntary affiliations. But in the end, they're so lonely because they're fearful of cultivating the capacity of genuine vulnerability and intimacy, which means like Hamlet, who was the greatest Western literary protagonist of the Western world with our dear brother Shakespeare. Hamlet suffers from the incapacity to love. I think Harold Bloom's right about that. Bloom's not right about everything. But he's right about that. You see, the incapacity to love. And the American Hamlet has the same problem. The American Hamlet is Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. Living on the surface, in mind, fearful of genuine community relationship, and therefore manipulating lust, domination on the surface throughout life, resulting in what? Very much what we have now in American culture, which is a culture more and more of a joyless quest for insatiable pleasures. You can get every possible pleasure in the world for titillation and stimulation, but still have your soul empty and your heart vacuous because there's no joy there. And joy is qualitatively different than the deep. Well, joy is qualitatively different than the superficial pleasure. And de Tocqueville could already see it. Thornton Wilder's lectures on American loneliness show this. David Reisman's great book on the lonely crowd tease this out. And it's something that one would have thought, especially Toni Morrison's work, one would have thought that black folk would have stronger buffers against, given the barbaric slavery and the vicious lynching and American terrorism of Jim Crow, which are the foundation so much of the American white mainstream up until the last 70 years or so. And yet more and more we find black people commodified, marketized, deeply shaped by markets' orientations of titillation, stimulation, spectacle, narrow success, when their great-great-grandmothers and grandfathers, who may have been materially unsuccessful because they had no money, were spiritually rich because they had a spiritual greatness that led them to still love their precious kids and sustain their churches and their barbershops and beauty salons and baseball leagues and musical connections so that it would generate unbelievable world historical forces that would reshape the sonic life of the whole globe with cultural ways of life and cultural modes of engaging the world, deeply Blackanized and Afro-Americanized, coming out of those great-great-grandmothers and great-great-great-grandfathers who kept that love train going in the midst of the catastrophe of American supremacy. And so the question then becomes, younger generations, especially the precious students, not just at Wake Forest, but other places. The crucial question of raising in the sun of that genius from the south side of Chicago, Lorraine Hansberry. And she wrote it in her 20s. You all remember that play. There's never been a figure with more love in the history of the American stage than Mama. And her question is, Walter, what you gonna pass on to Travis? What you gonna pass on to your child? Your father died. We're looking for his money in order to get out of this hood, not because we want to live with white folk, because we want to live wherever we want to live. It's a freedom move. It's not a matter of being assimilated and co-opted. You live where you want to live. But teach Travis something. What you gonna do, Walter? We used to talk about freedom. Now it's all money, 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 money. Bling, 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 bling. Cream. Cash rules. Everything. Round me, but don't have to rule me. It's round me. That's the genius of Wu-Tang. That's the genius of Wu-Tang now. They might be from Staten Island, and we don't expect too much out of Staten Island. Well, you know that. They're not from Brooklyn and Harlem. That's all right. Those geniuses got something to say as voices in a larger tradition of a great people that says in the face of all this hatred, the love will still flow. In the face of all of this terror, the freedom will still flow. And in the hatred of all of this trauma, the healing will still flow. Ooh, what a people at our best. And in the end, if America doesn't understand that now that it has the blues wrestling with its own more and more lack of leadership and character, if you don't learn something from a blues people, you're going to lose everything. Lose your democracy, lose your rights, lose your liberty, maybe even lose your whole planet. Because of organized greed at the top that doesn't want to come to terms with what nature as a thou is as opposed to nature as a it to manipulate. So we learn from each other, from Augustine, from Plato, from Shakespeare, from Toni Morrison, Cesar Chavez, Carlos Santana. And a whole lot from John Coltrane.
Absolutely. Well, you do mention the arts, and at Wake Forest we do a lot of work here in the arts that think about theater, dance, poetry, literature, visual art as ways to understand and inhabit various forms of character. And you're an artist yourself.
I wouldn't say that.
I think we all would say that with your.
I aspire to.
Well, I think you live the artist way here, and
you really can.
And so, what role has arts played in your own formation of character, and what role can they play in the formation of character in our civic life?
Oh yeah. No, for me, that music is probably the most constitutive feature in my life, other than family and Jesus. Now, you remember Martin Luther himself said the two greatest gifts of God was music and the Word of God. That's Martin Luther. Now, he's got some vicious things to say about our precious Jewish brothers and sisters. He got vicious things to say about peasants, but he spoke some truth. And I think one of the reasons why he was so preoccupied with music, and of course he's a musician himself, he wrote A Mighty Fortress Is Our God itself. He democratized the singing within the ritual of the church. He allowed for the congregation to sing as a whole rather than just the choirs. That was a very important move in the 1500s. And black folk would take it and just take it to a whole level he knew not of. But it's very important. Black folks are Protestants in that sense, the African appropriation of that particular strand within a Europeanized Christianity that did not begin in Europe. Very important to keep in mind. Jesus does not look like Michelangelo's uncle. Very important, just a matter of truth. Just a matter of truth. You see. So that for me, music is constitutive. You know that I grew up singing, maybe sometimes, oftentimes out of tune, but I grew up singing. Sound like Marvin Gaye in the shower. In the church, on the block, James Brown, as Bootsy, as George Clinton, as Donny Hathaway, it's the emotions, it's Ashford and Simpson, and that's just the beginning of it. I don't exist without them. I can't preserve my sanity without them, and I'm only in my right mind 4 days out of the week anyway. And so that music is constitutive. Unfortunately, again, given our differentiated spheres in our culture, you got art in one corner, ethics in another corner, science in another corner. It's science, ethics, almost like the context. You know, the first critique's got science and the new physics, and Then you got ethics. Got to save a little room for God and freedom and immortality. Then you go, oh my God, we got the arts. Well, that's kind of objective, but not really objective. It's collective, but not really true. What about religion? That's religion within the limits of reason alone. Maybe certain feelings, oceanic feelings, would fit in to become part of the new modern worldview. No. That's never been my story at all. At all. My history, my conception of who I am begins with moans and groans and cries. That's why Socrates never sheds a tear. I'm impressed with his intellectual integrity, spiritually underdeveloped. Because anybody who's never shed a tear has never loved anybody. And no matter how smart people are, if they never loved anybody, I'm not deeply impressed. Grandma may not have read Socrates, but she loved me. She loved Cliff. She loved Cynthia. She loved Cheryl. She loved folk in her church. She loved all those little precious black folk who came to vacation Bible school that she taught over and over again and passed it on to my mama. That kind of witness has to do with concrete love. Now, Socrates is not pushed out. We need Socrates, but he's necessary, not sufficient. He doesn't cut deep enough. Jesus weeps. Ooh, that's different. That's different. Our Jewish brothers and sisters begin Hebrew scripture with what? Cries of affliction. Now, when you start with cries in the face of catastrophe, then how do you deal with a reality that is so overwhelming that you know language is inadequate, you know you don't have a solution for it? Somebody sing a song. 1837, Philadelphia. First time black people come together as a public. Henry Highland Garnett walks up, got one leg, leaning on a crutch, and said, I want to tell you black folks something you never forget. He said, our situation is not that of the Israelites in the Christian Old Testament. For us, Pharaoh is on both sides of the bloody Red Sea. That's Henry Highland Garnett. And it got silent. It's a cricket. And somebody in the back said, could somebody sing a song, please? But we laugh now to keep from crying. We in a situation now. Somebody got to sing a song to encourage us, inspire us, keep us moving. The kinesis of the kairos connected to the kenosis. That meaningful moments that allow us to push chronos back so that we can keep persevering in order to maybe give enough of ourselves for a breakthrough. That's the history of any oppressed people's struggle. That's the history of the species. That's why Vico is right. You begin with burial and the corpses. It's not Heideggerian talk about abstract possibilities of love somewhere down, of death somewhere down the line. You begin with corpses. That's Vico. And what do you do with those corpses, Vico said? Silence first, then moans, then groans, then a song, then poetry, later on philosophy, later on science. Ooh, our Italian, iconoclastic Catholic brother Vico. He's on to something deep here. He's on to something deep. And I think, within the academy, you can imagine, this has tremendous implications in terms of the various schools of thought that circulate and travel. The concrete experience in time and space. And it's one of the reasons why the artists of the last 150 years or 250 years tend to mean much more to us than the philosophers. You see, as Europe reaches the end of its age, it started in 1492, it was over in 1945, begins with the expulsion of Jews, it ends with the inability to come to terms with Jewish humanity with those concentration camps. But of course, the colonization of the world, the reshaping of the whole world in the interest and in the image of those nations between the Ural Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean, the Europeanization of the world. those last 40 years, who really provides the deepest insights? Well, Kafka is the Dante of late European modernity. Does any philosopher even come close to Franz Kafka? I love John Dewey, but let's not do harm to him. That'd embarrass John Dewey against Kafka, you know. No. The Dante of our day, Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison. Let's look at the underside. Let's look at the infernos. Let's look at the possibility for the purgatories or the paradises. She even writes a novel, The Paradise. But the beloved Inferno. Who has the courage, the genius to explore the underside of the American experiment and do it in such a way that you still revel in humanity across the board? But of course, Toni Morrison writes as a musician. She is a literary musician. And her inspiration is the greatest musical artist of the 20th century. I'm just going to be real bodacious. Sarah Vaughan. Sarah Vaughan. You see, when the history is written of who, with artistic mastery of craft and scale and scope and breadth and intensity, is willing to wrestle with the whole picture in light of a tradition bequeathed to her in voice. Sarah Vaughan. Now, Billy and Ella and others are unbelievable, and we won't get into a debate about that. But Toni connects with Sarah Vaughan in that way, you see. And she gives us and has given us and will continue to give us, we hope, some resources to deal with this crisis and catastrophe that we are in. Because there's always a chance that we might not get out. That's why pessimism is so pervasive. That's why your first chapter on Beyond Pessimism is so timely. The pessimism among the younger generation is running afoot. Afro-pessimism is one of the most popular philosophical and theoretical perspectives. And the lived pessimism, the lived nihilism of young people is off the charts. It's on steroids. Now, I don't even think we have full data on that.
No, you're right about that.
We really don't.
We don't, yeah.
I've taught in prison for 42 years, and I've seen it. I've seen the transformation of it. Mainly with the brothers. I can't get into the sisters because it's a segregated system, you see. I can see it. You see. And so, there's no guarantee, but that's all right. It's never been a guarantee. We just got to fight. That's what character is about. Defining who you are and deciding to be a certain kind of human being regardless of the circumstances, because that's who you want to be. Integrity is not about utilitarian calculation. It's about the kind of person you want to be and what people will be able to see and say when you are in your grave. What kind of legacy you leave. What kind of witness you enacted. And most importantly, whether you put a smile on the face of those who exemplified the highest levels of moral and spiritual excellence, what I call revolutionary piety, that reverent attachment to those who came before. It could be vertical if you believe in God. It could be horizontal for every human being. Those who have loved them and shaped them, you see. And there's no accident that the market these days is erasing so much of young people's access to the best of the past. That's the sign of a decadent civilization. You no longer have access to falling back on the best that allows you to deal with the crisis. And so you come disarmed to the catastrophe and then wonder why you defeat it so quickly. But, this is the blues. The blues always wrestle with catastrophe and then always a smile and a style, because your style and smile can never be taken for you. You got a joy that the world didn't give you and the world can't take away. So you always come out swinging. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. That's my tradition. That's my tradition.
It's a good tradition.
Yeah.
Well, I think I have time for two more questions, Cornel. And so I want to follow up on the last point you just made about how do we be armed from our traditions to address our catastrophes. So how do we think about tradition especially given now that we're thinking about the ways in which our texts that we in our traditions are often flawed.
Right.
You
That's
mentioned
right.
several philosophers tonight who have views that are really problematic and horrendous. So how do we grapple with the need to reclaim a tradition, but also to be critical about it? How do you engage classic text that might have views within them that are actually quite horrendous, and yet still want to claim resources from them that might be useful for us? So how do you think about that question?
Yeah, I mean, one, though, I think that hermeneutical humility is a precondition or a prerequisite for any kind of serious intellectual engagement. If you're looking for purity or pristine perspectives, then you can go to a little narrow catechism that's connecting you to Manichaean views that has little to do with truth and beauty and reality and has everything to do with power and manipulation and subjugation. Now, unfortunately, those are very popular. They really are. But I think anytime you're talking about quest for truth, you acknowledge none of us have a monopoly on it. Same is true with beauty and goodness and the holy. We don't have a monopoly on it. As a Christian, I learned from Malcolm. As a Christian, I learned from my dear sister Bell Hooks, who's Buddhist. I learned from Ambedkar, who's Buddhist. I learned from Gandhi, who's Hindu. We learn from Jeff Stout. We learn from John Dewey, who are agnostics and atheists and so forth. I mean, I may have been a bit misleading when I've been talking about tradition because I should be talking about traditions with an S. No one of us have one tradition. We may have been disproportionately shaped by a certain tradition that itself has diverse and heterogeneous expressions. But all of us have different traditions. And it cuts in a lot of different ways. When black people began to redefine themselves as New World Africans through Hebrew texts and Koine Greek New Testament texts, that was a variety of different traditions coming together. When black people shifted from dreaming in African languages before they were on those barbaric ships, and more began to dream in the language of Shakespeare and Milton and Ruskin and Virginia Woolf, English, and most black folk I know. And I love all of them, no matter what language they're dreaming in. But most of them I know, they dreaming in English. So no matter how African they think they are, they better come to terms with linguistic hybridity, linguistic appropriation. Now, black folk have done things to English that's beautiful. We won't go into it right now. We won't go, it may not pass a grammar test sometimes. Hey, who cares about certain rules? Folk have been making some rules for a long time. That's arbitrary. And even when they have fair rules, like when Jack Johnson knocks out Max in Reno, Nevada for the first time to get the black heavyweight champion, what happened the next day? They started killing black people all across the country. Don't you feel uppity just because he won only space in the whole country? He got fair rules and white man gets knocked out. And black folk dead next day. So you say, you want us to respect your rules? You have no respect for your own rules. But we refuse at our best to be in the gutter with the gangsters. We're going to ascend to a moral and a spiritual. I was talking about that with my Alpha brothers today. We had a marvelous conversation about that, you see. That we know, no matter how gangsterized things are, we refuse to allow being a gangster the conclusion. We wrestle with the gangster in us, but we still attempt to transcend it in that way. And one of the ways you transcend it, listening to a variety of different voices, all the different traditions all around the world. You see? That's what Coltrane was listening to. Asia, Africa, Japan, North Carolina, High Point, Hamlet, his grandfather, Reverend Blair, who went to jail because of his love for black people. Coltrane playing Love Supreme, all of that's coming through. He's got Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah he's reading, all of that coming through Coltrane. He's not isolated. He's open to mobilizing all the insights he can in order to come to terms with a catastrophe that is multi-leveled. And so when people talk about, well, whether we read Plato, what, have you read Plato? Try him for yourself. Let's read Plato and have a conversation. You think you know something about courage? Read De Locke. You think you know something about justice? Read Republic. You need something about piety? You read the Euthyphro and see what you think. And people say, oh, God, this is more fascinating than I thought. You don't say. You're not the first one to reach that conclusion. He got something to say. Well, I don't agree with him. Most people who read him don't agree. That's not the point. It's the playfulness of intelligence. It's the wrestling with the complexity of the issue. It's the laying bare the possibilities and modalities of perspectives that forces all of us to broaden our perspectives, no matter where we come down individually. And I'm just using Plato as one example because it's an easy example. Now, people might say that, about Thomas Jefferson. Should we read Thomas Jefferson? He was a barbaric slaveholder and a heroic anti-imperialist guerrilla fighter, or supporting the guerrillas pushing out the most powerful empire of the day. I'm anti-imperialist. So I'm with Jefferson fighting against the British Empire. Full solidarity. Full solidarity. Black man, Sally Hemings could have been my far cousin. Which means if I run into him in person, I'm a Christian but not a pacifist. You don't mess with my sister like that, brother. No, that's statutory rape. Well, we were really in love. Well, you need a strong argument in that. I'm being facetious, but y'all get the point. It's the best and the worst. It's the great breakthroughs and the thuggish sides. And that's true of all of us. Every culture, every gender, every sexual orientation. Nobody pure, pristine, no one free of spot or wrinkle. I know we got just one last question. Did you want to answer any of these questions?
I think you're doing just fine. I think you're doing just fine.
I don't want you to suppress your voice.
I feel empowered.
Lift every voice. And he's got so much to say, believe me. His brother Michael got a whole lot to say.
Well, I do want to think about this last question as one of advice. We have faculty and staff here in the room from around the world who think about how to educate character, and students here who want to develop it. What advice do you have to faculty and staff about how to educate character? And what advice to students do you have about how to develop it here in the university?
Well, I mean, in some ways, though, both you and I, going back to our conversations at Princeton, brother, we want to try to be the character that we write about. Because we're at moments now where people have heard so many sermons, but they haven't seen enough sermons. You see, everybody can talk a good game, pose and posture, say something that sounds so X, Y, or Z because it's attractive. But the real test is when you have to give up something. When you have to take a risk. Got to go against the grain. That's the test. You see, that's the crucial thing. You see, we wrestled with this with the Obama situation in terms of what does it mean to love truth, love black people, and support a black president. Brother West, how come you so critical of Obama? I'm not hating on the brother. I don't like presidents who have intimate relations with Wall Streets that lets Wall Street gangsters get away with not one going to jail when Jamal and Letitia getting railroaded to jail every day. I don't care what color the president is. I was talking to my dear brother Drumright. I don't know if he's here today, but yeah, absolutely. I was talking to my brother. Another prophetic brother here. The Brother West, that means that black people not gonna like you. I don't love black people for them to love me back. I love black people because they are precious and worthy of being loved. Period. Then I raise my voice. I could be wrong. I could be right. But I'm not gonna stop loving black folk. Now that Obama's gone, I'm still loving him and black folk. That wasn't the point. The point was the hoods are still there, the prisons are still there, the wealth inequality is still there, the drones are still being dropped on people all around the world. The Americans using its power with various kinds of ugly regimes around the world. That's still happening, whether you got Bush, Biden, gangster, Brother Trump. And he's dead up gangster. He's an honest gangster. He's a candid gangster. And sometimes it's better for the gangsters to be honest, to be upfront, as opposed to saying little nice things and then stealing away and speaking the truth. See, Trump is incapable even of that kind of shift because the gangsterism just cuts off through the brother. He stands in the need of prayer in a deep way. But the important thing is, that's the test of character. That's the test of character. Thomas Paine says what? These are the times that try human persons, souls, character, integrity, honesty, dignity. And you discover when you make that kind of distinction, it's never just race, gender, nation, class. It's human at its deepest level. And when it's human at its deepest level, if there's not enough people standing with you, you can become misanthropic and you can give up on the capacity of human beings to ever cultivate the capacity to have high quality character. That's Jonathan Swift at his worst. Mark Twain at the end of his life. You see, human beings really ain't worth nothing for the most part because all of them are basically tied to gangster and thuggers activity. And there's some truth to that. There's always a truth in pessimism and nihilism and skepticism. But for those of us who hold out with hope, character, integrity is not the truth. That's the cross you have to go through. And the long Saturday you have to live in order to still be tied to some possible Easter, some possible Sunday, some possible breakthrough, some possible epiphany or revelation or kairos, whatever secular religious language you want to use to allow human beings to have the chance of finding a way out and stay in movement given the dimness and grimness of our day. And the saddest thing is, I want to end with this though, because this is something to help us understand some of our neo-fascist brothers and sisters in America. I encountered this at Charlottesville when we were face to face, and I could see the joylessness. I could see the hatred and the anger, even as they would listen to Stevie Wonder in the park. See, that's deeply American, isn't it? When they come to kill black folk, but they want to listen to Stevie because his music cuts so deep, even their humanity. You see, that's deeply American. It's deeply human, but especially American. Even with David Duke, I run into David Duke, you know. He's head of one of the major Klan things, and he's Catholic. And the Klan was founded against black folk, Jews, and Catholics. Now you got a Catholic running one of the main. That's upward mobility, American style. That's American too. Next thing you know, you're gonna have black folk and Jewish folk. That's how wretched we are as human creatures. I'm not just talking about them, I'm talking about us. There's elements of that in us. There's elements of that in us. In fact, when one of the brothers came up to me, you know, one of the Klan cats with all this stuff on, and I'm sitting up there, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. I said, oh Lord, have mercy. And he said, I can't stand the fact that you always talking about brother on television. I said, oh, brother. Huh. I said, Jesus loves you just like Jesus loves me. I said, you choose to be a cowardly gangster. And I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. I'm on a human continuum with you, but your choices are so spiritually sick. It's going to lead toward a fascism that we lose all of the best of this imperfect, flawed experiment. But you are my foe. You are my enemy, and we are in serious combat. And to love your enemy for a brother like me means to always recognize that I'm hating the sin and still staying in contact with the humanity of the sinner. I'm hating the white supremacy, but still recognizing white supremacy is just one form of evil that shot through all of our human hearts and souls, and therefore drawing the line politically and ideologically, but recognizing this same human being can end up changed and transformed. Because it's very difficult to grow up in a white supremacist civilization and not be so deeply shaped by white supremacy that no white person is born woke. Just like no black person is born woke. You got to work at it. You got to fight for it. You got to undergo change and transformation and education in order to reach it. And in that sense, the only hope that we have is generating characters who are enacting and embodying the beautiful things that they're talking about and writing about. Because if all you have are your texts that are so beautiful, but if your actions and your praxis and your character is still so thoroughly underdeveloped with very little effort for the attempt to be better, then we all go down together. Hang together or hang separately. And that's I end on a blue note, but as I said before, the blues always ends with a smile. Yeah. Oh yeah, always ends with a smile. Yeah.
Well done.
Brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ooh.
Thanks, Cornel West.
God bless y'all. God bless you. God bless you.